We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. Less than ideal. A little surprising that I'm here right now. It's going to seem like Tom and I just pour it on when it comes to water damage stuff, but it's my turn this time again.
I'm bringing liquid in here. That's going to be a problem. Go on.
Yeah, so thankfully not too crazy terrible. It's actually a leak that has happened in my unit in the past, twice in the past before. I think I've mentioned this before. You were trying to picture it, but like my building is kind of L-shaped because it's a high rise, but then the fourth floor kind of extends out to the side, so it's kind of like an L-shaped building. So
what a weird building.
Yeah. Well,
that sounds like a super villain layer.
It's got like a wider base, and then one part of it keeps going up higher. So instead of being a T, it's an L. It's just that way. But anyway, I'm on the fourth floor, so I have a section of roof that is not directly above me, but just beside me. I'm on like the corner of the high-rise part that's right next to where the fourth floor roof extends out to the side. So prior in years past, something in the drain got some problem in the roof drain there for the rainwater, and it is raining very heavily right now. So there's a column inside of my unit where there is a drain pipe for that rainwater drain from the roof, and it has leaked in the past twice before, and it has leaked again now. But this time it was like they discovered, because they opened up my wall, they're like, we could actually hear like a hiss and a water sound. We're like, well, that ain't good, and that's never been there before. So they opened up that column, and there is like a coupling on that drain pipe, and that was just spraying water into the column inside, which of course was getting down and forming a nice little swimming pool at the bottom of that column, which was then draining out below my baseboards and covering a good portion of my living room floor. But at least it's just rainwater. It's not effluence type water, not that type of drain. And at least it's like, I've got, floating laminate floors. So that's, one of the, not going to be too damaged by that. And we got the fans and the dehumidifiers, and they've put a kind of a Band-Aid coupling over it for now. Further repairs will be needed, and they're finally going to install a clean out in it so that we can maybe prevent this from happening quite so easily again in the future. So all in all, and it just so happened that the plumbers were already like on our property, because they were dealing with, there's two buildings on our property, so they were already here dealing with a hot water problem in the other building, and they were waiting on something just as I reported this, so they were like free to come over and have a look, so there wasn't a long wait for plumbers to arrive. So all in all, there shouldn't be like any... Yeah, there shouldn't be any insurance claim on my part. None of my stuff was damaged unless there is residual damage to my laminate floor, but it certainly doesn't appear that there's anything like that going. Yeah, like I say, we got the fans and the dehumidifiers going, and the extractors were in here very promptly and all that. So avoided what could have been worse, but it's still, less than ideal. Not something I would wish for to happen. And in between the time I woke up to work on today's topic list and coming into the bedroom where I record this podcast, that's when it happened. So it was literally like maybe 5 minutes before Tom and I were going to start recording at our normal time. I'm like, oh, hey, there's water all over my floor. This is going to have to take priority. So we're recording like 2 hours later than we normally do, and all that type of stuff. But anyway, yeah, there you go. I've vented. I've shared the news. There it is. Don't worry, you don't have to send me PayPal money. I'm not recovering from anything too terrible, but it's, still more flooding. Why the heck not? It's AVRant. AVRant and flooding goes hand in hand, apparently.
It does.
Crazy.
So I guess the only really update from me from this week is we had, it's been another crazy week of things not necessarily moving forward, but not necessarily moving backwards either. So It does seem like inextricably we are moving towards that house that I lived in no longer existing sooner rather than later. So we are getting pricing on knocking that down and that sort of thing. And it's always, actually asked an architect that we met with and said, how do you... It's not like you use demolition crews more than once. It's not like it's
on
not
one
like
property. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, most people, it's like, how do you know if a restaurant's good? You look at the reviews, right? Like, how do you review a demolition company? It's like, I don't know.
Like you're trying to hire your own, so you're looking up.
Yeah, we're gonna have to hire our own to knock down the house. So at some point, but there's also a big tree involved and a bunch of other stuff. So it's not.
Okay.
I mean, it's never as simple as just not going in there with a bulldozer. And
I would imagine you ask for references as you would with other contractors, and
that's basically what we're going to have to do. But we've already gotten a couple of suggestions, and then we'll have to figure these things out. But it's not on the horizon. It's just something that we're.
I mean, at least it's
an idea.
demolition, so if they accidentally knock into something, it was probably going to be knocked into on purpose at some point anyway, right? It's not,
one would think.
Not quite the same as caring about the finished product of a builder, so.
That is true. So, but, I'm sure that it can be done poorly.
I would imagine.
It costs you more money in the end, so
yeah.
I don't really know. So not a lot's been going on. It's been very busy stuff with my kid. We had some friends come in town, which I haven't seen in a while. Very excited to go out to dinner with them over the weekend. So it's just been, my wife went to the symphony with a friend of hers while I went to some improv performances here in town from a group that I sometimes work with. And just been sort of, every night's been something.
Okay.
Every night's been something. And
the improv group was as an observer, not as a member, or?
Yes, because I'm a member of the community, I guess, is the way. I'm in the show. I'm in one of their shows.
But not this one that you went to.
But not this one. I went to go see their shows because it was like a Who's Line, and for those of you who've seen the TV show, Whose Line Is It Anyway? It's like a staple of every improv troupe now. It has to do with Whose Line show, and it is very popular, and there was a lot of people there. And these are some of the more veteran performers, more veteran than me. So I got to see how they did and kind of compare how I do compared to them. And then there's their like staple Saturday night show is like the big anchor show of the entire weekend, which is at 9 p.m. on Saturdays, which is really late. I know it sounds terrible, but that's really late for me. I'm like 9 p.m. I'm like, oh, I don't want to stay up that late. It's not that I don't want to stay up that late. I'm often up much later than that. I don't want to be out that late. I am at that age where it's just like, oh, I'll have to drive home. They might go late.
Yep.
I might want to stay after and talk to some of the performers. And I'm just like, ugh.
That's a midnight.
It sneaks. And they were like, oh, we're having an after party. Tom, you want to go? I'm like, no, I really don't. It's not that I don't want to be with you people. It's that I don't want to be out that late. It's already too late for me. I want to go home and go to bed like an old man. But I often get up at 6 a.m. to go cycling. So that is part of the problem there. But it was good. It was fun. And my wife got to go to the symphony and with one of her friends. And, it was overall a pretty good time. Pretty good weekend. Like I said, we got to go out to dinner with some friends that we hadn't seen in a long while. And that was also very exciting when you haven't seen somebody in a bit. And of course, it's been since before the flood and everything else. We haven't seen much of anybody. So we got to rehash all that, which is, they're very sympathetic and, empathetic about that. Oh, we wish we could have done more. I'm like, you didn't have to do anything.
Oh, well, anything anybody could have done on that one.
There's really nothing to do.
That was force majeure.
Yes. So that does mean that we did not finish watching
Inside Out 2.
Inside Out 2. We did start because I did not pay attention. But if I had paid attention, I wouldn't have done this. But I thought, oh, well, there's the new Saturday Night Live 50th anniversary special. We'll start that. We'll watch that, and then we'll finish Inside Out 2. Well, we've been watching that every night. It's 2.5 hours long, not including commercials. And there's commercials on Peacock because it sucks. And I'm just like, oh, my God, when is this thing going to end? I figured it out last night. That we've been watching it forever. I'm like, my wife's like, isn't it over? Isn't this it? I'm like, it feels like it, but I know that Paul McCartney is supposed to be on here at some point because I remember at the beginning there was an intro and it said Paul McCartney, and I haven't seen him yet, so it must not be over. And then I clicked the pause button. And I looked and it was like, oh, it's 2.5 hours long. 2.5 hours. That's like 2 weeks worth of watching for us because we watch in like 15 to 30 minute chunks,
15 to 20 minutes. Yeah, sounds about right.
So we're never going to get through this thing. And a lot of that was played for themselves, if that makes sense. They are making jokes that for themselves to kind of entertain each other, which I think is perfectly reasonable to do.
That makes sense in Saturday Night Live for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So some of it's for us, the audience, and some of it's for them to kind of, either thank each other or give each other a hard time or make each other laugh, which, sometimes they're almost inside jokes, but you can kind of tell they're supposed to be funny. And the people in the audience are laughing because they're all in on it. But us on the outside are like, I don't get it. But it's certainly nice to see a bunch of old, returning cast members and people doing things you hadn't seen in a long time. So what did you watch, Rob?
Yeah, I did watch one movie this week, which was The Wild Robot, which I had
animated.
It is animated. It is DreamWorks. I was very much looking forward to this because it had a lot of very, very positive reviews and very, very positive hype online. People saying it, really tugged at the heartstrings and was really emotional, and people really, really loved it. And I guess I got a little bit too much hype on it because I was a little let down, I was a little disappointed. I certainly didn't hate this movie by any stretch of the imagination. It's not like that, but I found it a little bit melodramatic, a little bit maudlin in points, but not so much that. It wasn't that it really overdid it on that end of things. I just felt like there was absolutely zero sense of subtlety. It was speak the subtext directly to the audience type, like, here is what you should be feeling right now. Here is what I am feeling, and here is what you should be feeling while you watch this. And it just kind of didn't work for me on that level. I certainly didn't have any moments of like tearing up or feeling a lump in my throat or anything, which they told me that's what I should be feeling right now, but it just didn't work for me on that sort of level. Yeah, it was just the complete utter lack of any subtlety to it whatsoever. Also felt like it was really kind of muddled in its messaging. Because this is about a robot, a service robot, a task-oriented robot that is. We don't exactly know what happened, but it was being shipped somewhere, and something went wrong with the shipment, and it ended up its crate ended up crashing in the wilderness, and so it has to try and sort of make sense of its surroundings. And there are no humans around; there are only animals around, and these animals are cartoon animals. They don't speak in English that humans can understand, but the robot learns to understand them, and they 100% are anthropomorphized, not in physical form, but they are speaking with fully formed human thoughts. They aren't actually acting like real animals in that way. You've got Pedro Pascal as the fox character doing pretty much an exact replication of the performance of Nick in Zootopia. It's like this. They saw Nick in Zootopia and they're like, that's the fox that we want in this movie. So, hey, Pedro Pascal, can you just sound exactly? Who was playing? Was that Bradley Cooper in Zootopia? Or anyway, whoever it was.
I don't know that. Probably. That tracks.
It sounded exactly like Nick in Zootopia. Lupita Nyong'o is playing the robot character. And that, I didn't know anything about this movie going in other than it was animated and people really, really liked it. So that was not quite the voice or the vocal performance I was anticipating, but I really liked it. The voice acting was not the weak point here, except for some of the script that especially Pedro Pascal was given to say was this extremely unsubtle, overt type of stuff that just didn't work for me. So the other main character, voiced by Kit Connor, who I am not really familiar with at all, British actor, and he's been in a few things that I think Rocket Man maybe was he had probably his largest role in that. Playing this little orphaned gosling of a goose family that is ends up being raised by the wild robot. So, there's, all these sort of comments on motherhood and found family and all these types of things, but it was really kind of muddled messaging, in my opinion, of like, so once you have a kid, you just give up on everything that you ever envisioned for yourself. Like that seemed to be kind of one message. And then it was kind of like, oh, okay, once that kid has left the nest, you can kind of go back. But no, turns out really all you can do as a mother is service other people. That seemed to be part of the message. It was yeah, a little bit. I'm not quite sure here. This is really maybe what you wanted to be saying. It was, yeah, the humans are awful. What few humans that we do meet, that not super surprised there. But honestly, maybe the thing I was most interested in was they didn't go into any details at all. We get a few little glimpses of the world outside the wilderness, and it's like the Golden Gate Bridge is mostly underwater now. And the only place that the humans can grow food is in these indoor, immense greenhouse farms that things can't be grown outdoors anymore. And it was kind of like, ooh, can we have some of that in this movie? Like it was momentary little glimpse. You get a sense of, yeah, something's gone really, really wrong for the humans in this world. They've invented these exceedingly polite robots to help out, not exactly reflecting the way that the humans act at all. So I was like, there's a lot more interesting stuff going on here, but they kind of went on this muddled messaging about motherhood and yeah, I can't say I was over the moon about it, which was very disappointing to me. And also, last comment about this movie, it really seemed like it was targeted on purpose for the TikTok crowd. It was like, here's a scene that you can clip out that is 15 to 20 seconds long that you can do your completely overacted emotional reaction to and throw it up on TikTok and say how this movie impacted you so much and oh, what a fantastic message it had in this 15 to 20 seconds. It was like, it wasn't that the whole movie was just a series of clips like that, but it seemed like those moments in the movie was like, here, we're gonna spoon feed it to you. Please react to this and put it on your TikTok channel. And that just kind of rubbed me the wrong way too. So yeah, I was disappointed overall. In a vacuum, it was a perfectly nice movie. The animation style, it was definitely stylized. The fur on the animals was not meant to look like real fur. It almost had a little bit of a cel-shaded appearance to it. Okay. The foliage kind of had that to it too. It looked really good, but it was not trying to look photorealistic, which I appreciate in a lot of ways. Everything doesn't have to look like everything else. So it looked good. It sounded good. The voice acting was strong, but I didn't think the script was particularly great, and I didn't love a lot of the storytelling in this. So. Oh yeah, a little bit middling on the Wild Robot from Rob H's review.
There you go. I guess that's, yeah. I hadn't heard much about it, to be honest with you.
I was a little surprised. I was a little in a not a good way. I thought it was going to be better.
That's tough when you get.
Yeah.
I mean, that's tough. So I actually, one of the shows, the late night show I went to, the anchor show. I knew the name of it, and that was it. And people were like, "Oh, you haven't seen one yet?" Well, it's kind of, I'm like, don't tell me. I want to go in. I like to go in blind at things. Mm-hmm. And I've told this story before in this podcast, but I'll tell it again really quickly here. I went to the movies with friends many, many moons ago, and you'll figure that out by the name of the movie. And we went to a movie, and I was like, they're like, "Oh, we're going to the movies tonight. We're going to see. Oh, we're going to go see," and I missed the movie. I'm like, "You want to go?" I'm like, "Sure, I'll go." Mm-hmm. I missed the name of the movie, but whatever. I like going to the movies. Let's go to the movies. So we get to the movie theater and we walk in, and I'm like, "What movie are we seeing?" And we're like, "Oh, we're seeing Braveheart."
Okay.
I had not seen a preview for this movie.
Okay.
I had not seen anything. I had no idea. I said, "What movie?" Like Braveheart. I didn't know Mel Gibson was in it. Yeah. I didn't know anything about that movie.
Before a highly problematic Mel Gibson. That was well before that. So
yes.
that wouldn't have been a thing unless you had been able to be clairvoyant and see the future.
Well, right. And so I show up for this movie. I'm sitting down, and I was like, it's also a very long movie for the
It is a very long movie, Braveheart is, yes.
And I was like, is this movie going to end? I mean, I was enjoying it, but I was like, oh my God. What is going on
Braveheart's a really good movie.
And it is a really good movie, but you're like, not knowing anything about it, it almost completely throws you off. But at the same time, you get I've so rarely gone into a movie other than like when you go to those film festivals where you show up for a movie and you're like, this could be about anything. It's just all you have is the name of it. Mm-hmm. That's it. To really have that kind of experience is kind of special. So that I will always remember that about Braveheart. But the opposite side of that is also true, where you get so much hype about a movie and get so excited about it that you can't it can't help but disappoint you. It has no choice.
I suppose. I mean, this one, it wasn't as though I knew any, like, I didn't know that the animals talked. I didn't,
Yeah.
I hadn't heard anything in that way. I had just seen a lot of really, really positive response to it, which wasn't like, nothing about that made me suspicious. I'm like, yeah, there are some really great animated movies. There are some fantastic animated TV shows now. So I was like, oh yeah, I have every reason to believe they could have made a really, really, emotional, wonderful animated movie from DreamWorks. They've made them before. There was no reason for me to doubt it. So that was, I was a little
I kind of feel like animated movies on the whole are better.
Yeah,
because so much more money and so much more effort goes into making them than some of these other.
You really do
movies.
have to have it written out and planned in advance, because it's not as though you can just change
wing it on the day and then edit it,
change the animation on the
post.
fly. That's right. Yeah. Writing it while it's still in production type of thing. That doesn't really happen with animation. Yeah.
All right. This is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. You can go to our website, find our shows, show notes, links to the articles and products we will be referring to, and audio, as well as our link to our Flickr album, so you can follow along with the pictures. You can find us on facebook.com/AVRant podcast for now, youtube.com/AVRant, where you can see the pictures embedded in the video.
That's right.
You can contact us directly, rob@avrant.com. His social is @FirstReflect, and tom@avrant.com. And I checked my email today. Did I? No, I did not. I have 388 unread. Yeah, I
was a
opened
quick
it.
turnaround right there.
Yes, 388 unread emails.
Goodness.
That's exciting.
Good luck.
We want to thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is go to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and it'll send you to a PayPal donation site where you can use your PayPal or your credit card.
Mm-hmm.
None of that information stays with us. It all stays with PayPal. As far as I know, PayPal isn't awful yet. Maybe.
Yeah, they're pretty bad. That whole honey debacle, because that's owned by PayPal, and
Honey is that plugin, right?
Yeah, the coupon thing which
turned out to be nothing but a scam.
Yeah. There was a quite the uproar on YouTube because many popular influencers were promoting honey, and that was not good. So, yeah, I know. There's nowhere that you can point people that isn't problematic.
It really is.
So.
Meet me in a mall parking lot and hand me cash. That's how it has to work these days. And even then,
go wrong with that.
I didn't like what you said about me on the podcast. Instead of money, here's a knife. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast to become a monthly contributor to the podcast. Every month, they'll take some money from you, a minimum of $1, and send the rest of it to us. We currently have 133 patrons. We want to thank our 133 patrons. Thank you.
Yes, we do. That is, again, patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So a big thank you to our 133 patrons of there. Patreon doesn't seem to have too many negative things being thrown at it right now that I know of. I mean, I know there were some people who didn't like it because they actually decided to not support horrible people over at Patreon, and the horrible people were like, how dare you not support the horrible people? So there was that went on for a while, but yeah.
I missed that. I'm trying to miss as much as possible. I've got my own problems. I can't fix the world. I don't have a home. Okay. Right. I'm homeless. So, I mean, I'm living in an apartment, and
mine's wet right now. So don't look at me.
Yes. Mine's at least dry as far as I know. Got notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going through.
Yeah. Why not? Through
Mark,
the raspberries.
Dave, Tony, Kevin says he likes our current format, and he has started using a letterboxed list to keep notes on our recommendations from our What We Watched segment. What Rob watched, because I haven't watched
That's
anything.
What it's been as of late, yeah.
And Jason, who says he's loving the podcast, please keep it going. So Mark, Dave, Tony, Kevin, and Jason, thank you for thanking us.
That's right. I'll say the names one more time. Mark, Dave, Tony, Kevin, and Jason, thank you very much for the notes of encouragement and gratitude. They're very much appreciated. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
In the news last Thursday, February 20th, I don't know why my computer is so loud right now. It's loud.
I mean, I can't tell because I have a fan and humidifier behind my door, so whatever is humming, it could be anything at this point.
Could be anything.
It all just blends into a wonderful white noise on my microphone.
I'll try to get an compressed air and blow out the vents in this thing, see if I can get this thing to stop being so loud. Anyways, Amazon MGM announced that they have reached an agreement with Eon, which is not Elon, to take creative control of the James Bond IP and license. Elon was looking for only the villains, but they wouldn't just sell him the villains. They wanted they had to sell the whole thing.
In his mind, isn't James Bond the villain? So
that might be true.
Yeah. He wanted the heroes in his view. Yes.
Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli, which is that how I've never actually said her name or that name. It's Broccoli, right?
They are the Broccoli family, yes.
I mean, it's always been so weird to see that pop up on screen every time I watch a James Bond movie. And I do like James Bond movies. Will continue to be part owners of the James Bond franchise, but they are stepping back from their decades of holding on to creative control. Amazon bought MGM in 2022 for $8.5 billion, but there hasn't been any release in the James Bond franchise since 2021's No Time to Die. And Hollywood sources say there is currently no story or script in place for a new installment, which has frustrated Amazon MGM. I don't know how we know they're frustrated, but whatever. Eon agreed to greenlight a 007 Road to a Million reality competition.
Yeah.
What?
I don't know. I don't know what the reality show was going to be, but I guess $1 million was the prize. That seems to be built into the title there.
Oh, I thought they were going for 1 million views. Anyways, but other than that, there has been nothing set to enter production when it comes to James Bond. The agreement still needs to pass through regulatory approval, and details on the exact deal between Eon and Amazon MGM have not been disclosed. But immediately following the announcement of a deal, Jeff Bezos took to social media. I wonder whose social media he took to, because I feel like his social media isn't doing so hot. To ask fans who should play James Bond next, and there have immediately been talks of streaming series, spin-offs of all kinds, and finding a creative director to shepherd the entire franchise as Amazon MGM expands it into something akin to MCU or Star Wars.
What could go wrong?
That's never ever backfired on anybody ever. Like let's do the monster verse or the dark whatever they called it, the Godzilla verse, which I thought was a great idea. Honestly,
there is the Godzilla verse. They were going to have the Universal Monsters Dark Universe,
which the Mummy, which was
died very quickly.
Atrocious movie. That's an affront to movies in general and Mummy movies.
They were starting with their Iron Man. Tom Cruise was going to be their Iron Man, the Mummy, and just didn't go anywhere from that universe. But James Bond, James Bond, obviously well-established character and franchise. But yes, the Eon Productions, the Broccoli family, they have jealously held on to control of the character. They've said many times how they're like, yeah, we're aware that we could be making more money with this IP, but they want to take their time, get things right. If that means waiting nearly a decade between James Bonds, then that's what they're going to do. They want to wait until they have the right story to tell, and the right right person to play James Bond, the right person to direct, that type of stuff. And right. Amazon MGM was like, nah, let's go a little faster and make a little more money, and let's wring out what we can from this IP that we purchased. So.
No offense. The whole thing with, I think, Marvel working so well in like phase 1, phase 2, or whatever that was, however it worked out, was that when they were making those plans, they weren't yet making a ton of money. They just, this is what we think we can do, and let's take it not take it slow, but not like plan it out too much, but also have a plan.
Yes.
And then
let's not forget that, Iron Man, Incredible Hulk, the first Thor movie, like those were made before Marvel was purchased by Disney. So things also changed while it was going along. But yeah, that initial 10-year plan, that worked out pretty darn well, but then they didn't have another 10-year plan after the first 10-year plan, and we've seen how that has gone. And so and Star Wars, all the spin-offs and everything of Star Wars is like, well, is that really what we want from James Bond? Do we need a Money Penny series that streams exclusively on Amazon Prime? Because that it's going to happen.
So this does make me think of Mission Impossible. Okay. And mostly because of the Tom Cruise thing that we just said. And also, Tom Cruise is James Bond in these other movies. Sure. I mean, he clearly is. And I remember very vividly when I saw the very first Mission Impossible movie in the theaters, I was like, even though I now like these movies, I now like them, I still remember the feeling of Tom Cruise literally just killed off all these characters to say, I am the most important one. The very beginning, everybody dies. Like the whole Mission Impossible thing was specifically to be about a team. Right. And so he gets his team and then he kills everybody off and says, I am Tom Cruise. I'm the big star. All these other people suck. And I held a lot of resentment about that. Towards the character, and still in the back of my mind whenever I see him, even though I don't mind the movies because I don't think of it as Mission Impossible, I think of it as a James Bond movie. Well, basically,
it's Ethan Hunt. Yes,
I mean, why even call it Mission Impossible? It's called Ethan Hunt. You know, look at me run, sort of thing.
Does, and we do have a running scene in every single one of them. That is a mandatory.
And I think that was the problem with the Mummy movie, is it was another, hey, look at me, I'm Tom Cruise, I'm more important than everybody else. And then that's also sort of been the issue with the latest Marvel movies, is they lost track of the fact that these movies had to be good by themselves, about good things, about with a good story that maybe wasn't always just building towards something else and always about one person or one specific storyline that was the through line. We've done this in TV forever, where you have a little bit at the beginning, a little bit at the end that has the through line, and everything else is self-contained. Until like the final. I mean, if you think about the whole Thanos thing, that's exactly how it worked. There's a little bit at the end of each movie that would kind of say, hey, there's a bigger story going on, and we're going to get to it. And then they had 2 movies that were all about it at the very end, kind of like the season finale of the whole thing. And then afterwards, they're like, okay, now what do we do? I'm like, I don't know. I didn't expect to get this far.
Yeah, they kind of, I don't know. I feel a little bit different about the MCU post Endgame, just because it seems like they kind of forgot to do the team ups along the way. We've introduced a lot of new characters, and nobody's really teamed up, and we've had tons of these new characters who've had one movie, and then it's like, you really expect us to remember them 7 years later when they show up in some future team up? It's like, I don't know, when Moon Knight shows up in some future Avengers movie, like, is anybody gonna care?
Well, we have the Thunderbolts coming up, and that's kind of fine, but most of those characters have either been
from
in
the Black Widow
movies,
movie.
or they were all from the Black Widow movie.
Yeah.
And they are some of the more popular characters, which is great, I guess.
It's not really saying much, though, so yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I do feel like they're throwing too many things at the wall and not letting and basically not letting something stick and not committing to it. They need to commit.
But trying to go the same way with James Bond, just trying to ring that IP idea for all it's worth. Yeah. It's like, it's not that I kind of agree. It's like, hey, okay, having a James Bond movie release on a fairly regular basis, a James Bond movie every 3 years, that type of thing. I'm not going to say no to that, as long,
of course not.
As long as there is some sort of creative direction behind it. And I can see, a large conglomerate like Amazon, MGM saying, yeah, we don't want to wait 8 years for the next James Bond movie. That's a bit too much. That's, in a way, I think, fair enough. But yeah, the idea that we're going to have, M Origins, and we're gonna have Q the college years and stuff, and it's like, what, stuff like that was like mentioned in Variety's article. It's that's scary. I they were kind of throwing that out there tongue in cheek, but I'm like, no, let's please not do that. That would be really
I feel
bad.
like no matter what we say right now, we could definitely be proven wrong. There's just no doubt about that. If done right, almost any of these things can work. Because I mean, a lot of us were like, "Oh my god, with Guardians of the Galaxy, the heck is those guys?" I've read a lot of comic books. I had no idea who they were. I hadn't even heard the name Guardians of the Galaxy. And I mean, you could say, "Well, you're not a real comic book fan." Shut up. You don't know anything about home theater. So, which is all. Both things are not true. So, sure, I guess I would say I'm apprehensive.
Yes.
And the fact that Amazon is going to be behind this. I've seen some of the original movies they've made. Does not inspire confidence.
Yeah,
I'll be honest with you. It does not. Zack Snyder is going to be the new creative director
that's
over
not
the James
entirely
Bond
out
franchise.
of the question, is it? Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine?
Because I'm thinking Netflix is maybe like, maybe we don't continue giving Zack Snyder all the money to do whatever the heck he wants.
I really think that, honestly, I think that Zack Snyder is, and I've said it many times on this podcast, I think he's a really good director. I think he's really, really good. Some of the action scenes, some of the movies he's made are some of my favorite movies.
Yeah,
even
the cinematography style to it and that definitely, there's beauty there for sure.
Not only that, but the influence he's had on other directors is undeniable. The man can direct the hell out of a movie. I just don't necessarily think he needs full creative control. And
because then you end up with 4-hour-long things, and
where he thinks. I mean, I think this is also true of people like Kubrick and other people. I think that as I don't know why Kubrick was the name that came to my mind, but I feel like everyone needs an editor. Yep. I don't care how good you are.
You need a good editor, and a good producer can have a huge impact on a movie.
You need somebody in there that go, did we run by this by the Gen Z, intern just to make sure they're not going to find anything funny with it, because they might.
At the same time, let's maybe not put in a bunch of 15 to 20-second clips that are clearly meant for the TikTokers. So yeah,
right. Again. Both sides. All right. Overall content budgets for 2025 from most of the major studios have been reported. Sony Pictures and Lionsgate are absent from the report. But the overall picture is that larger portions of the budgets are being allocated to sports, and spending overall is relatively flat or even down a bit compared to 2024. As much as I don't watch American sports, and when I say American sports, I'm talking about like the big 3 or 4. Football, baseball, basketball. Of the 3 of those, only one I will willingly watch is football, and the other 2 I will actively try not to watch as much as possible. You can't make me watch baseball unless it's literally I'm in a bar or something, or a restaurant where they have it on the TV. Yes. Basketball is the same way. I can't stand either of those sports. It's just not my sport. And football, I don't mind as much, but it's certainly nothing I'm ever invested in. I do like having sports on, though. Like my wife and I often will sit there and watch sports off of YouTube, because we can talk over the top of it. Right. We're not really invested in anything. A lot of times the important parts are short and punctuated.
They'll do a replay. If it's really important, you'll get the replay. Yep.
Yeah, so I don't mind them spending. And I feel like sports in general, probably, some sports get way too much money, but most sports get way too little. So I don't mind them spending a little bit more on sports. Yep. So Apple is set to spend $7.5 billion, up a hair from the $7.3 billion spent in 2024, with a good chunk of that going to MLS. So Major League Soccer?
Yep.
Sure.
That's
no
Apple's
offense
thing
to America, but most of the rest of the world really cares about soccer. The fact that we don't is stupid. Amazon will spend $9.1 billion, which is down from $9.3 billion spent in 2024, but Amazon separated out their new NBA deal, so they're actually spending more in the end. So basketball, whatever, who cares?
Yep.
A lot of people care.
A lot of people care about
I don't
NBA.
care.
It is very
I know
popular.
a lot of people whose whole personality is basketball.
That's right.
Like, that is their whole personality. Fox is one of the bigger budget increases, $9.2 billion versus $8.1 billion last year. You can thank the NFL for that. Maybe after the halftime show they won't be. Yeah.
But
how much
they got quite a bit of praise for how Tubi actually handled the live streaming of the Super Bowl. So they're like, hey, let's press on forward with that.
We did watch the last half of the game on Tubi, because we were watching it at my parents' condo place that they're renting. On their TV, whatever it was, and then we went home and watched it on Tubi, which was nice. Paramount is cutting costs ahead of trying to sell itself to Skydance, that's Tom Cruise, right? Skydance is Tom Cruise's production company, isn't it? Pretty sure.
I don't think he's an owner.
Or is it J.J. Abrams?
Nah.
It's one of those.
That's not the name.
Anyways, they'll spend $15.2 billion, down from $16.4 billion last year. Netflix lands in the middle of the list, spending $18.6 billion, up from $16.2 billion last year, after acquiring worldwide distribution of WWE. Warner Brothers Discovery is holding steady at $19.5 billion. This is not all sports. I'm off the. I'm getting confused by all the sports things. So this is just how much you're spending on.
This is like just content in general, right? Movies, television, streaming. They kind of bundled it all together. Although Amazon separated theirs out, so their 9.1 is their streaming entertainment budget, and then the NBA is a separate deal.
Okay.
But the others, they just kind of all mashed together.
Right. So when you look at somebody like Apple, they have other things they're doing.
That's right. MLS is a big spend.
Yes, it's how much they're spending. Okay. Warner Brothers Discovery is holding steady at $19.5 billion. They've lost a lot of NBA coverage, but will carry the Olympics in many international markets. Disney is holding flat at $23 billion. They're planning to spend $1 billion more, but then canceled the Venue sports streaming service that lowered their budget as a result. NBC Universal tops the list, but will spend slightly less this year than last, $27.1 versus $27.5 billion last year. So those numbers are so astronomically high as to mean nothing to me. Like, what's the difference between $7 billion and $27 billion? I know it's $20 billion, but
it's still quite a bit of money. Yes,
I mean, it's a lot of money, but what does that mean?
But if we're just looking at trends going on, like, clearly it is not the industry is spending, gazillions more this year than they were last year. I mean, holding pretty flat, so it's not like it's shrinking dramatically, but they are repositioning portions of their budget more towards live sports. That makes sense. If you want return on investment for your advertising, if you want to know that people are watching it in a timely fashion, live sports is definitely the thing these days. So yeah, I can't say any of this doesn't make sense, but yeah, it is just an indication. It's an indication of where the industry sort of is as a whole. And also kind of interesting that, the ones that are streaming only, I mean, Netflix eclipses what Amazon and Apple are spending, and yet they're still not spending as much as the established broadcast companies, Warner Brothers, Disney, NBC Universal. They're still spending considerably more than even Netflix is. And then, you get, a company like Apple, what they're doing in streaming is a rounding error. They found that in their couch cushions and I guess we'll just, do some more streaming shows. So it's because Apple has enough cash on hand to just buy every studio outright if they wanted to. They wouldn't even have to borrow a penny to do it. So it's clearly not that big of a priority for them. But yeah, there it is.
Right. All right. Comments from last week. Dave asked us about adding tactile transducers to the DIY racing simulation rig that he fabricated and built himself. Scrolling past the picture. Thankfully, he actually enjoyed me going off and ranting about people asking for as cheap as possible solutions, so he's not offended or put off at all. He found it hilarious. Thank you for having a sense of humor.
Yes.
I'm sorry that I targeted that your question spurred that little rant, but it certainly wasn't aimed at you. I do hope the guy who I said shouldn't be allowed within 500 feet of a school didn't found it the same way, because I did think I should maybe have edited that out. But
I think within context, it was okay. It was clear that it was a joke and it wasn't actually meaning him, and he didn't really believe that about the individual.
My back itches is driving me nuts. Furthermore, he was pleasantly surprised at the price points for all the various options we suggested. He was expecting every option to be multi-thousands of dollars, but thanks to our recommendations for ButtKicker Gamer or Dayton Base Shaker solutions, this is going to be easier for him to obtain than he thought, and he'll be going for the ButtKicker Gamer Plus 4 corners kit that Rob said would be his top recommendation for the sort of rig that Dave has built. So he says thanks. Great.
You are welcome. Yeah, I think you'll be very pleased with that. That can be hooked up in the case of he's using his PS5 at the moment. So you will be using, the LFE output. That's what's going to be feeding the 4 corners. In that one, you could also do what I talked about, which is actually setting the left and right, because he was just using a 2.1 speaker setup. So he could set it up where the left and right are separate and set to full range, because each of the base transducers, each of the ButtKickers in that setup has its own separate amplifier. So there is going to be some Y splitting going on of the signal either way, and then you could have it where the left and the right are separated. Or if you actually go to a 4.1 type of setup, you could have the front left, front right, surround left, surround right, all separated, and be feeding individual bass signals to the four corners that way. But then if he ever does transition over to PC racing simulation, that kit has the software that can put its little programming hooks into the telemetry data of the racing games. They charge an extra $5 per game to do that on the PC, but he has all those options open to him when he goes with the ButtKicker Gamer Plus Four Corners kit, and he likes the price, so that's good. Congratulations.
Good. Something's going on here. I'm not a little unclear what's happening. All right, get to the questions here. Stefan already owns a pair of SB2000 sealed subs. He is thinking of getting more subs. Whatever he gets would have higher output capabilities, but that got him wondering, could he actually keep his pair of SB2000 subs and just stack them? What's our opinion on stacking subwoofers, and would it be better to attach the SoundPath isolation feet, or better to stack the SB2000s without the isolation feet? I mean, technically, you would only need the isolation feet for the bottom one, whichever that was. Technically,
I mean,
I would put them.
You want some kind of pad in between the two that are stacked.
What you wouldn't want them to do is mar the finish.
Yeah,
more
and also you could get some vibration noise from the two of them. In theory,
like if you were to put wood on wood, sort of thing. Yeah. I don't know why this microphone is in a terrible position here. I repositioned my microphone.
If you already own the isolation feet, then I would not detach them. I would sit the one SB2000 sub on top of the other, both of them with their isolation feet in place, because that is in no way going to be a detriment to the quality. Sure. There's no downside to having them there, other than I guess there's the little visual gap created between one stacked on top of the other with the isolation feet in place. But as long as you're okay with that visual little gap being there's no downside performance-wise. I would absolutely leave them in place. And then,
he's not telling us here is what other subs he's going to get.
What the second sub.
The real question I think you're asking, other than the isolation feet, which is I think of marginal really importance here, is can you use these two subs in conjunction, as one, and then another sub as being the second, quote unquote, second sub in your, and then it would of course depend on the size of the room. You're getting more output. You won't get lower extension, but you won't need lower extension. But you will get more output. Like 6 dB more. Yeah, you get having these subs.
It's
stacked.
Just imagine that you still have one SB2000, but it can suddenly play about 6 dB louder than it could before. That's essentially what's happened there by stacking two of them one on top of the other.
So if you look at your other sub that you'll be getting and you say, first of all, 9 times out of 10, and by the way this question has been worded, I think he knows this, we're going to say you don't need another. You don't need to get a higher output sub, which is what you would be getting.
Yeah, we don't have all the details of the room. If this is a room that has a permanent opening to the rest of the house type of thing, then you very well could make use of that additional headroom, although be careful how the rest of the house is going to react, because if that's the case, you're still probably not going to be able to fully pressurize your space if it has permanent openings to other parts of the house, and then the rest of the house is going to be hearing that bass, so that's not always the best thing. It's one of these ones where you should be aware, if this is an enclosed space, if this is not a gigantic space, then very often when people are tempted to, I want bigger subs, it's like, well, do you actually want bigger subs, or is just that you want more physical rumbling in your chest? You want more of a kick from a kick drum or from an explosion? And if that's really what you're going for, very often you haven't actually run out of headroom. No. It's that you are someone who would appreciate a little bit of manual EQ, not a perfectly flat line or even just a steadily rising line that's, 3 to 6 decibels louder at 20 hertz than it is up at 200 hertz, not just a slope. That you actually want a hump in that 40 to 60 hertz region where most of the chest feeling tactility is in the bass. And it's not that your SB2000s, exactly the way they are now, are incapable of providing that to you. It's that they've been equalized. That DSP is already in place from SVS, that they naturally anechoically provide really, really linear output in their base, especially through that region. And then you've done whatever room correction. Maybe you've used a rack and you've, put in a gradual slope, but you're like, I'm still not just feeling it in my chest as much as I want to. And I'm mistakenly thinking that it's below 20 hertz that's going to give that to me. So
Right.
I need bigger, higher output subs. Lots of people think that.
And
It turns out
thinking that is because it is said with such, casual air. I got these subs that have infrasonic, just like that theater we're talking about last week.
That's right. Yeah.
He's like, I got the infrasonic sub so that I could really feel the bass. I'm like,
It's the classic.
You just said
thing
those words in that order, but that doesn't make them true.
If finally getting a subwoofer that can play linearly down to 20 hertz, that it doesn't roll off well before 20 hertz, like many perfectly reasonable subwoofers, but many subwoofers do. They roll off quite dramatically, starting at 35 hertz, 40 hertz, something like that, and down. They are not linear output down to 20 hertz. And if getting a sub that is finally linear down to 20 hertz is good, then getting a sub that is linear down to 10 hertz must be better, right? Just like if having your CD sampling rate go up to 44.1 kilohertz is good, and 48 kilohertz on DVDs meant that there was, slightly less aggressive digital sloping that needed to go on at the high end. If that was good, then going up to 96 and 192 and 384 kilohertz in our sampling must be even better, right? It was good getting to the limits of human hearing and human perception. Going beyond it must be even better. No, that's a fallacy. That is I can totally see where that thinking comes from. It's not like there's any mystery about why somebody might think that, but that is a fallacy. That's not the case. So yeah, if what you're feeling is like, hey, I just want more physical kick in my chest, go ahead, use the parametric EQ that's built into your SVS subs, or manually change. If you're using Odyssey, use the Odyssey editor app. If you're using Dirac, use the manual target curve app. Put a hump from 40 to 60 hertz. You're allowed to do that. We're not going to tell you not to do that if you want more kick in your chest, and I'll bet you actually have enough headroom already available. But if not, is a bigger room than the SB2000s could handle, and that can certainly be the case. It's not like the SB2000s are the be-all, end-all of subwoofer outputs. There are absolutely rooms that do exceed the headroom capabilities of SB2000 subs. Then yeah, this is like getting an SB2000 that is suddenly able to play 6 decibels louder, and if that's what you need, we're perfectly fine with you doing it. And leave the isolation feed in place if they're already there.
Yes, please. Spencer says he's interested in putting together a period-accurate retro gaming setup for the PS2, GameCube, and original Xbox generation consoles. He's read that game developers back then used to rely on the image distortion inherent in older displays to make the low-resolution textures, sprites, and low polygon geometry appear more realistic. So plugging those old consoles into modern flat-panel displays makes them look significantly worse. He's been considering buying either a tube CRT TV or a rear projection TV. I would not go with the rear projection, I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, that's a little spoiler there, but I agree with Tom. I wouldn't go with the rear projection TV.
He's gotten, as somebody who has seen both, I'll take CRT over rear projection, not 10 times out of 10. He's got an inkling that the tube CRT would do a better job of making those consoles look their best, but perhaps we have reason to believe otherwise. He'd be interested to hear our take. The original Xbox had limited support for 1080i and 720p HD resolution output using component video, so it would be a plus if whatever display he buys could accept that. Are there any TV models in particular that he should be on the lookout for? Which display technology would we recommend he target as his priority? And since he can make enough space in his home office to accommodate up to a 48-inch TV, by the way, a 48-inch CRT TV weighs about 7
Well, they
pounds.
weren't really available. There was
I
talk
think
of
36 was the biggest I've ever seen.
I mean, commonly available. There was a whole actual YouTube journey about a guy who found the actual largest tube Sony CRT that was ever made. And there was like only a handful of them made, and I think there were literally 2 left operational in the world. And it was like this whole adventure they went on where they found, it was like this Japanese, I think it was a restaurant or a bar where the owner had purchased one of them in the past, and they still had it. And they were like, there is no way to get this thing out of the building other than knocking the whole building down. It was like they were closing the place down, and there was like thousands and thousands of dollars spent to crate it up and bring it over to the US. It was quite the remarkable thing, but that was about the only way to get larger than about 36 inches in a tube CRT television. So that is not realistic, but about 36 inches is potentially realistic. Yes.
So he can accommodate up to a 48-inch TV. What screen size should he go for, especially if he ends up targeting a rear projection TV? Well, I don't think you should go with the rear projection
I would.
TV.
I mean, there were CRT-based rear projection TVs, but the chances of any of those being in good operating condition today is really, really low. And if you're not doing that, then it would have been one of the early generation DLP rear projection televisions, which it just wouldn't be my choice if what you want is the best performance for retro gaming and you are dead set on getting a display that would have existed at the same time as those consoles. So, I mean, a few things that I'll say about it is if that is what you're dead set on, then yes, one, I would be looking for a tube CRT television. I'm going to do the same advice that almost anybody would give you, which is that at the time, in those late generation tube CRT TVs, the Sony Vegas, WEGA, but pronounced Vega, the Sony Vegas were the tops. Those all came with component video inputs at that time. Now, the late generation Panasonic CRT TVs were also pretty darn good. So I wouldn't neglect if there is a Panasonic that's in really good working order from that sort of generation. It having a component video input is kind of the clue that it is from that later generation. And I would target a 4:3 aspect ratio because Panasonic in particular started doing some I think it was not quite 16:9 because that was when they were using the rectangular pixels that didn't quite perfectly make it 16:9. It was a very strange time in displays back then. But they did have some that were the more rectangular shape, and only the Xbox in that generation had the option on some games of outputting in a native 16:9 resolution. The vast majority of games on all of those consoles were still in 4:3. So you're better off targeting a 4:3 display if you do it that way. The other thing is, though, all three of those consoles did have component video output as an option. The GameCube, I can't remember if it actually did 480p. I think it was still 480i, but it was component, and it was markedly better looking than certainly the composite yellow video output that came with the console. If you got the component video cables, which I did for my GameCube, and it was very readily apparent how much better the image looked just using those component video cables. And the PS2 had component video output as an option as well. So that is something that I think is really worth targeting, is getting the component video outputs for it. So all of that said, it's not like anybody is today manufacturing 32 or 36-inch CRT tube televisions that are really good, and that's what you can go and buy. You'd be looking in the used market, and it's a little bit, hit and miss. It's a little bit dicey. They're old. They are going to wear out. Having them repaired is not the easiest thing. So there is an alternative. I would feel very remiss if I didn't mention that there is an alternative to you, which is the company RetroTink. They have their converter boxes. And the one you would want to get in this case is the 5X Pro. That is the one that can accept full component video, and it will do a wonderful job of deinterlacing it with motion adaptive deinterlacing, which is what you want, not just basic bob or weave deinterlacing. Full motion adaptive deinterlacing, scaling really, really well up to 1080p. It can technically scale up to 1440p, but there's not really any reason to do that. And then output it all from HDMI to a modern display, making those consoles look about as good as they can possibly look on a modern display. And you would want to connect it to an OLED. These days, you would want to use an OLED because they have instantaneous pixel response. And the little bit of scaling that a modern day OLED would have to do from the very, very clean 1080p output that the 5X Pro from RetroTink would give you up to the native 4K resolution, that's very, very easy for any OLED to do. It's not going to make any errors or introduce any artifacts when it does that little bit of scaling from native 1080p up to its panel 4K resolution. So the 5X Pro is a $325 device. It's not cheap.
Not cheap.
But that is less than you're probably going to pay for a tube CRT in really good working order these days, because you are not the only retro gamer looking for good working order CRT televisions
There's
today.
only one input on this thing. He either need 3 of them, or he'd have to manually switch all the component audio cables,
or get a component video switch, which still can be had
Sure.
for not a crazy amount of money. So yeah, I mean, there's some playing around with this to really make it all work well, but it's just I wouldn't want you to solely set your mind on getting myself a late generation Sony Vega or Panasonic Tube CRT.
I
is
wonder
the
if
only
this is
thing you're
more
really
of
gonna do.
I wonder if this is more of a he wants to. It's gonna look interesting. It's gonna look cool in his office to have a big old CRT sitting over there, and people are going to, and maybe the people are just him, are going to walk in and go, "Look at that big old CRT over there. That's kind of cool. I haven't seen one of those in years." In which case, if that's the direction you want to go, there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, we're not going to dissuade you from that. But I think Rob's right. This is sort of the best of all worlds solution, because I think any CRT that even if you found one and you plugged it in and you did some tests and you're whatever, I mean, you may be tinkering with this forever, trying to get it to work right, just to find out that it's just on its way out. Or you may get one that's really nice and then it dies within a year or two, or even less. So I like this solution quite a bit.
It's kind of remarkable how good the retro consoles are capable of looking on a modern day OLED TV when they are de-interlaced and upscaled really, really well. I agree. If you just plugged the composite output that came with those consoles directly into a modern day OLED, I'm like, that doesn't look very good at all. That's not the way I want to play those games. I completely agree. But when you have the RetroTink devices are specific for retro video game consoles. That is what their deinterlacing and scaling has been tuned for, and nothing. But I don't think I would want to use them to upscale my DVDs in particular. This is specifically about gaming. That is what they are for. And they make your games look remarkably good. They look way better than they ever looked back in the day on the original CRTs. It's kind of remarkable how good they can look on an OLED.
Mark is experiencing intermittent HDMI signal dropouts when he's using either his Panasonic UB820 Ultra HD Blu-ray player or his PS5. He's kind of pulling his hair out at this point, trying to figure out the culprit, so he's really hoping we might be able to help. His display is a 77-inch Sony A80K OLED. His AV receiver is a Denon 3800H. He just installed brand new, fully HDMI certified 3-foot Rui Pro ultra high speed HDMI cables from his Ultra HD Blu-ray player and PS5 to his Denon, and he has fiber optic HDMI cable from Monoprice going from his Denon to his Sony OLED. He's tried 50-foot, 40-foot, and now a 30-foot length. He's attempted to turn off HDMI CC in all of his components, and he has tried sending his PS5 to the lowest bitrate video output that still supports 4K resolution. Nothing has fixed the issue so far. Both the video and audio cut out from time to time, and the TV screen goes completely black. He has noticed that even though he has had turned off HDMI CC in every device in his system, his receiver still powers on automatic. Something's not turned off.
Something not quite turned off.
I'll tell you that right now. I like how he has tried, and then it comes down here, it's like, and I have failed. Okay.
And we're not blaming you, because we understand how stupidly difficult it is to actually turn HDMI CEC off. Yeah.
Yes, HDMI CEC, getting rid of that is like trying to get rid of a bad politician. They're everywhere. He has turned off HDMI CC in every device. The receiver still powers on automatically when the TV is powered on, and he can still change the volume on the receiver using the TV's remote. So can we help him out? Do we have any suggestions he can try that will eliminate these annoying signal dropouts? You have CC on someplace. It is still there. It's called something else. It might be like in multiple places within the menus. A lot of times it'll be in the power settings, and then it'll also be someplace else. It might have to turn off for every individual input. Who knows?
Yeah, on the Denon, on the plus side, they have separated out many of the different features of HDMI CEC and give you individual on and off control of several different features within there. One of them, for example, normally HDMI pass through, which is not a CEC feature, but pass through is on by default. And then along with that typically comes the what do they call it? The TV audio, the automatic TV audio. Now that is part of the audio return channel.
Right.
And what that's saying is if you are using the audio return channel, that the Denon will automatically set itself to the TV audio input, just like how you select all your, various HDMI inputs, your cable SAT input, your Blu-ray player input, all those HDMI inputs. There's another input inside of the menus just called TV audio, and there is a dedicated button for it on the Denon's own remote, but there's no physical HDMI input for it because it's the HDMI ARC port. It's the monitor out port is the TV audio input port as well because of HDMI audio return channel. And that is on by default and sometimes very easy to miss, but that means that part of CEC still has to be active because in order for the audio return channel to work, part of CEC still has to be active. So it could very easily be that setting in your Denon that you're like, well, that doesn't say CEC or HDMI control. And it's not even something I was thinking about because it's the auto TV audio setting. Why would that be CEC? But it is. It's part of CEC. The other thing is if you have connected the Denon to on the Sony, I think it's HDMI 2, which is the ARC port. But if you've done that, the Sony is not going to turn off HDMI CEC. It's going to be like, I'm connected to either an AV receiver or a soundbar. You must want to use ARC. There's no scenario the Sony TV can ever envision where you don't want to use the audio return channel if you plugged an HDMI cable into my audio return channel port. So it will never let you turn HDMI CEC off, which is called Bravia Sync in the Sony. And even if you go in there and you find Bravia Sync and you turn it off, it's still not off if you plugged anything into that HDMI ARC port. So part of solution number one, it sounds like you've plugged everything into your AV receiver and then run a single HDMI cable from the receiver to the TV. Don't plug it into the TV's ARC port. Now, I don't know. He didn't mention having a separate streaming device, although he did say he has other sources besides his PS5 and his Ultra HD Blu-ray player. Those are the only two devices that are giving him these signal dropouts, but I don't know what other. You've got a cable box, you've got a stream box, I don't know.
All those things have to have it turned off too.
If you have any other device that can do streaming, then you don't really need the audio return channel from your TV. You're not using the built-in apps to do your streaming from the TV if you have some other streaming device that's plugged directly into the AV receiver. So do not plug the AV receiver into the ARC port of your TV. That might be enough to fix it. Just doing that might be enough to fix it. Then beyond that, the Denon and the Sony TV both have HDMI bandwidth options for their various inputs that in the Denon are labeled as standard, enhanced, and 8K enhanced. Standard would limit you to below 4K 60 types of bandwidths. And it's primarily there because if you still wanted to play 3D from a 3D Blu-ray player, very often that won't work unless you set it to the standard bandwidth output for that particular HDMI port. The enhanced setting in the Denon is for 4K 60 with HDR, 444, no chroma subsampling, and then the 8K enhanced is for 8K resolution or 4K 120 support going above 4K 60. And there can occasionally be conflicts of a 4K 60 maximum device plugged into a port that's been set to 8K enhanced, and for some reason there's a little bit of, I don't know if it's the copy protection or some other part of the HDMI bandwidth schema that doesn't go quite right. So in your case with an Ultra HD Blu-ray player with an Ultra HD Blu-ray player, you'd only ever need or want to set that to enhanced. Your Ultra HD Blu-ray player is never going beyond 4K 60.
Sure.
But the PS5 can, right? The PS5 can do 4K 120 with HDR, so that would need to be set to the 8K enhanced to be able to get all of 4K 120 through that port. So you could look at that in the Denon settings. Now, similarly, the Sony TV lets you set standard or enhanced with Dolby Vision or 8K enhanced without Dolby Vision, because you can't have 4K 120 and Dolby Vision on the Sony TV, but you can have 4K 60 and Dolby Vision. So they separate out all those choices. And your PS5 is never going to output Dolby Vision, so it can be set to the 8K enhanced without Dolby Vision, but the Ultra HD Blu-ray player could be set to 4K enhanced with Dolby Vision. Now, that would mean now you actually kind of want to use two different ports on the Sony TV, depending on which source device you're using. If you're wanting to get absolute maximum out of it, that could actually mean you're using two monitor outputs on your Denon if you really want to go down that rabbit hole of trying to do all that. So if what we're trying to do is avoid signal dropouts, my recommendation would actually be to set everything to the 4K enhanced setting, the 4K 60 maximum setting, because let's be honest, there are virtually no PS5 games that are actually doing 4K 120. Like, if they support 4K 120 output, they're not rendering at 4K 120. It's doing some frame doubling in there, and it's not actually being rendered at 4K 120. So I'm perfectly happy capping my PS5 at 4K 120 or 4K 60 output, not 4K 120. And who knows, maybe that's part of the issue that's going on here. Maybe you're like, oh yeah, I set everything to the 8K enhanced because I got a PS5 plugged into my Denon, and I want to make sure I'm not limiting it to 4K 60 since it can technically output 4K 120, but I would just set everything to that 4K enhanced setting. That's by far going to be the most compatible. So if it's none of that, then the only other culprit would be one of those fiber optic HDMI cables from Monoprice. That's the only other thing it could really possibly be at that point. So I don't know, maybe you go with a different brand if absolutely none of those other settings have helped, but I'm betting one of those settings does help, because yeah, there's enough possibility there that it could be some of that.
Yeah. He and his wife were watching Cobra Kai on Netflix in 4K, and after several close-ups of various actors' faces, his wife turned to him and said, "I don't like your TV." She was put off by how revealing the 4K resolution was of the actors' faces, showing every imperfection in their complexions and making their makeup look obvious. He had to agree. Is this chasing after image perfection on displays actually a downside compared to how our older, lower resolution displays used to hide imperfections with their blur? Well, I mean, you sound like the porn industry, honestly, because that's what they were saying when 4K. That's when they said when HD came out. That's what they said when 4K came out, and that's what they're going to say the next time something comes out. Because the whole, they take into account when they're doing sets and makeup. It's not just makeup. Now, you're noticing makeup because that's the thing that's most easily recognizable to you as a person who's used to looking at other people. But if you start paying attention to the backgrounds in some of these shows, you'll be like, oh my God, it's clearly a fake wall. I mean, it's not even close to a real wall. I never noticed that before.
There's gaffer tape over part of that screen back there, because whatever was on the screen they didn't want you to see, and they just threw some gaffer tape over it.
That's right. I mean, you can see all kinds of stuff that you didn't see before. And is that a problem? Well, it's a problem for the people who make the shows and do the makeup and all these other things. It's a learning curve. And we've been talking about this when we talk about new audio formats or video formats, but mostly audio formats that come out. When they first come out with surround sound, there's people who are like, I'm mixing in stereo and you can all suck it. I've been doing it for 30 years. I'm not going to change now.
And there are people who are like, yeah, this is technically in an Atmos container, but I did a channel-based mix. There ain't no objects in this Atmos container.
Yeah. And that's just sort of the way these things go. It's a learning curve, and it takes a while for them to kind of catch up and figure out what looks good and what doesn't look good. And it might just be the technology that they're using. To be perfectly honest, they have to upgrade a whole bunch of stuff in order to to view things and to master things and mix things and all these other things. So, they may be looking at it on their screens and going, well, it looks pretty good. And then you get home on your 77-inch OLED that they did not have access to when they made that show. that was not readily available to most people, and maybe they're mixing it or mastering it on something that, like, most people are going to have a 55-inch TV and they're going to sit this far away from it, so that's what I'm going to be doing. And you're sitting at a reasonable what I would consider to be a reasonable distance from a very large, very well calibrated, very accurate display, and you're like, man, I can see where the makeup ends on that person. Hey, I hate to break it to you, there's people in real life, you can see where the makeup ends.
Yep.
Okay.
No, I mean the news anchors weren't happy either, right? They like that, just the switch to HD, let alone 4K.
Yeah.
They weren't happy. They're like, yeah, you can see that I actually age like a human being now, and I have makeup on under these studio lights to read you the news. Yeah, they weren't happy about it. I mean, so this is not a slight against you or your wife or anything like this. But what I do when I see that is like, thank God. These are human beings. You know, like Ralph Macchio's been around for a couple of years, and he still looks remarkably young. He
still looks pretty good, but it's nice to see some 3D pores or whatever that you're like, oh, he's a human being. I always kind of find that a little bit reassuring. But I see your point. Yep. Sure, it can be distracting. It can take you out of the moment for certain shows, but go back and watch like really old shows and how awful the audio is and how clearly they're using a laugh track. Like some of the early episodes of like very beloved popular sitcoms, and not even early ones, like maybe every single episode, where it's clearly a laugh track going on. It's just, I can't enjoy it like I used to because I know I can hear how it's a laugh track and how obvious that is to me now as an adult, where maybe when I was a kid, when I was first watching it, it wasn't so obvious. So,
and seeing classic shows and movies that have been rescanned, released on even just Blu-ray, but on Ultra HD Blu-ray, and it's like stuff that they absolutely just went ahead and left in the shot because they're like, yeah, nobody's ever going to actually be able to see it in the film projection theater at those very low light levels on the old CRT televisions. Like you're just never going to see it. You're never going to notice it. So absolutely leave it in the shot. And now, rescanned, all digitally cleaned up and put in there like, oh, well, there's a cable going across the floor. There's the wires that they use to suspend either that person or that piece of the set. Yeah. Like there's the tape. There's the whatever.
You can even see some things that are that when they rescan them in, aspect ratios are different now than they used to be, and even if they do cut it for 4:3,
stuff that used to fall into the overscan is now
and now all of a sudden there's like the little lens of a camera shooting in from the right,
the
or
marks
whatever.
On the floor. Right?
Yes,
actors going to hit their marks like, oh, there's the tape on the floor where they're going to go stand. Yeah, there's this funny production stuff like that now becomes visible. So yeah, you're absolutely right. If it's all about suspending disbelief, that little bit of artifice.
The idea that I'm going to go buy a crappier TV so I don't see stuff like that is anathema to me. I just cannot imagine going, well, I'm going to go back to my, 36-inch CRT, since apparently that's the theme of this podcast.
Right.
36-inch CRT, just so I don't see the makeup. I'm like, maybe I won't do that.
I think we need a negative sharpness setting, right? Forget about just turning the sharpness setting all the way down to 0, because that's actually just where it should blur. Be. Doesn't have any edge enhancement on it at that point. We actually need a negative sharpness setting. Maybe that's what we need.
That's what we need. Karl, first up, a little bit of update regarding his Kaleidoscape Strato S player with its built-in 6 terabyte hard drive that died. He did purchase it from an authorized dealer, so they are doing their best to work with Kaleidoscape to find a solution for Karl. Communication back and forth has been a bit on the slow side, but Kaleidoscape has already issued Karl $600 worth of movie credits, just like 2 movies.
And no, it's a little better than that. The movies don't cost any more than discs, and they quite often cost less than a disc over at Kaleidoscape.
His dealer is still attempting to find a way to get the Strato S hard drive replaced, but Karl didn't want to wait, so he went ahead and bought a new Strato V player from them, which was just installed at his place this past weekend. That purchase was part of the recent Kaleidoscape's movie credit to him was $600, and his dealer will try to work out some sort of trade-in credit if the Strato S cannot be repaired and returned to him to act as a server within his system. So not a perfect solution, but better than nothing for sure. Yeah, you can always throw money at the problem.
That's right.
Anyways, continuing on from his question last week about how many movies we see each year out at a movie theater, he guessed Tom's answer beforehand, but he was shocked that Rob doesn't go more often. He was actually curious as to whether Rob might take in the same movie more than once, but at different theater formats in order to compare the different experiences, such as IMAX versus Dolby Cinema, for example. That's something Karl enjoys doing, although he's pretty much concluded that laser IMAX is his favorite. If we do not typically see movies out at the theater more than once in different formats, do we at least have a preference that we could share? So yeah, I have a preference for specific movie theaters.
Sure.
So it's going to be a Dolby Cinema or an IMAX theater almost exclusively.
Mm-hmm.
I could, like you, Karl, I have access to just about every type of theater I could want to see, but the drive is not worth it, to me. I'm only going to drive to the theaters that are near my house. I'm not going over to Tampa. I'm not going to cross a bridge. I'm not going to fight all that traffic and pay for parking or whatever just to go see a movie, though I have, but I would prefer not to. So yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I do pay extra for the nicer theaters, but I don't inconvenience myself too much in order to go to them.
For my part, in the past, years ago, I have on occasion seen a movie out more than once in different formats to do the comparisons. So it's not that I've never ever done it, but it's definitely not something I do now. It's primarily time. It's a little bit money.
Right.
Movie ticket prices are really, really expensive now. And it's just kind of, value for money. It's like, well, I can either see this movie once out at the theater and then also get it at home, or I could see it twice at the theater, then I probably wouldn't want to buy it at home as well. So there's a little bit of a value proposition going on there. Where I am, we have nice theaters, but we still do not have any Dolby Cinema theaters. They just do not exist in my neck of the woods. So I definitely have a strong preference these days going for our now laser projection IMAX theaters. That's going to be my preference for sure, pretty strongly. If it's not available there, we do have now laser projection, full Dolby Atmos, what we call Ultra AVX theaters, which is, a large screen of that, but it's not up to the performance level of a Dolby Cinema. So that would be my second choice if it's not available in IMAX. We only have 3 IMAX theaters here, and one of them is the newest one with the laser, but it's not the full original IMAX screen. The other 2 are the full original IMAX screens and still capable of showing film, which is really, really nice because there's not that many in the world that can show film-based IMAX still on the original 1.36 to 1 aspect ratio screen, I think it was. So we have a couple of those, which is really nice. But IMAX is my preference for sure.
I was curious if I could figure out what I have near me, but you're done talking, so I'll have to. Yeah. Raf in Australia, just how well do the SVS SoundPath isolation feet actually work? He has invested in a pair of ToneWinner SWD8000 dual 15-inch driver ported subwoofers. But his home theater is upstairs and the walls throughout his house are shaking. So some of that is purely going to be from the sound pressure level, right? But will the SoundPath isolation feet help stop all the walls from shaking? He's hoping he might be able to add the feet to his subs for an easy solution, so any guidance would be appreciated. You can test this out by putting your subs on something soft. Now, these are big subs.
These are big, heavy subs, yeah.
So to kind of deal with the actual question, these things have 5 ports. Is that what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's 5 big old ports on them, and clearly 6 feet on the bottom. Now you can get a 6-pack of the SVS SoundPath isolation feet for $70 for the 6-pack. So that is entirely doable. You'd be getting 2 of those 6-packs since you have 2 of these ToneWinner SWD8000 dual 15-inch powered subs. But yes, that's
so. Normally, what I would suggest is you trying this out by putting them on top of something squishy. So it'd have to be a lot of stuff that was squishy because of how heavy these things invariably are. I didn't see the actual weight of them. So a lot of times we'll say, fold up a comforter, a big thick comforter, and put underneath, in your case, I might even just do 1 sub in order to try to see how it would go. But I just don't know if you're going to be able to completely isolate them. I would, with 6 feet, I don't see an issue with the weight of these things.
Yeah, I mean,
being
I'm
distributed.
pretty comfortable saying that, yes, the SoundPath isolation feet do work. I can confirm they are effective dampers, decouplers. If it is a matter of physical vibration that is translating from the cabinets of the subwoofers into your floor and therefore into the structure of the rest of your house, that the SVS SoundPath isolation feet do a very effective job of preventing that physical vibration from making it from the subwoofer cabinet to your floor. They work. They absolutely do that part of it. Now, will that 100% stop all of the shaking in your house? I kind of doubt that. If you're playing these at very high SPL levels, then you are just dealing with airborne vibration of sound. That is going to be part of it. You are still going to have any flanking paths that are present, your ducts, the electrical outlets in your walls, if they don't have any backing on those. Like anywhere that the sound can possibly move things, it will move things. So it's not as though this is going to magically transform your theater into a soundproof theater, but it is remarkable how much of the sound transmission, how much of the shaking of the house is due to just sheer physical vibration translating from the subwoofer on its regular rubber but not very compliant, not very thick feet that it comes with, to something that is a purpose-built damper decoupler. So I would absolutely expect, sight unseen, expect there to be an improvement, but whether it's going to be all the way to the level that you're hoping for, it's tough to say.
So just remember, so what Rob's talking about with flanking paths and stuff is the sound getting out of the room and getting into the rest of the house, which is invariably going to happen here. You're not talking about putting feet on this thing and suddenly you won't hear your subs anymore. That's just not the case. But the reason why the isolation feet or any sort of damping material works with a subwoofer in sound transmission or vibration transmission from the subwoofer to the rest of the house, and why your walls will shake less, if not maybe not at all, is because sound, as it goes from one medium to another, in this case from air to the solid of your walls, it loses a lot of energy,
and it mostly reflects.
Yes.
The fun example is you have something vibrating underwater, and you can actually kind of see those vibrations. If it's that type of thing, you can see the ripples in the waves, and as it reaches the surface of the water where the water meets the air, you're like, well, there's nothing stopping that vibration from going up into the air, right? Like you're thinking to yourself, like there's no hard barrier there. Nobody put a plank of wood on the surface of the water to prevent it. And yet almost all of that vibration energy reaches that barrier between just the surface of the water and the air. Nothing solid there whatsoever, liquid to gas, and still those vibrations reflect off of that barrier and that boundary and come back down into the water. A small percentage goes up into the air. So it's mostly that you have solid surface meeting solid surface. If they are wildly different in their density, then that can act as a boundary as well. It will to some degree, but the more different the two mediums are, solid to gas, that is very, very different. A lot of it is just reflected back from whence it came.
So those SoundPath isolation feet just stop those sound waves that are created by the subwoofer that are in the cabinet itself from going into the structure of your home, and then from structure, from piece of wood to piece of wood to piece of wood to drywall that's screwed into it or nailed into it, to everything else. I would expect there to be a pretty great reduction in the walls shaking and things on the walls physically vibrating and shaking and making noise. But I don't know that so those noises would go away, but the sound from the subwoofer that is exiting the room will not be decreased at all, because that's sound going from air to air to air to air.
If it's going through your HVAC ducts, that is still going to happen. But the SoundPath isolation feet, they do work. They're not some kind of like snake oil scam or anything like that. And they are effective at stopping that solid to solid vibration transmission. So I give them a thumbs up. I think they're worth a try for sure.
Absolutely. Infinite Gary, regarding his Luxman stereo integrated amp that is still working fine when using its RCA inputs, but fails to produce any sound at all or movement on its VU meters when using its XLR inputs. Okay, on its,
yes,
not hits. Rob suggested trying some different XLR cables since it is possible for the 3-pin connectors to be wired differently depending on the devices. The thing is, a few months ago, he was using the very same Parasound JC3 Junior Phono preamp with the very same Better Cables brand XLR cables connected to the Luxman. He moved some equipment around, but now the setup is back to the way it was a few months ago, and it was all working fine back then, but now no sound coming out at all. The Luxman has a balanced 1 input and a line 1 input selection, and it is always as simple as choosing the one he wanted to use before. No other dip switches or toggles between the balanced and the RCA. So it's puzzling. He did try swapping out the Better Cables XLR cables for a pair of monoprice XLR cables, but no sound at all. Mm-hmm. And yet the RCA inputs work perfectly. So it really does just seem to be the XLR inputs on the Luxmans have died, since his XLR source devices still work fine on other pre-pros that he owns. Strange. I would say it was a switch. He's got a switch. Right? Has an input selection.
Well, there's
right?
an input selection on the integrated amp itself.
Oh, on the integrated amp.
Yeah.
Okay, so it wasn't a switch.
Like, which input are you using? No.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the input or something. It's the input's broken, whatever.
Yeah,
but anyways,
something has...
Something's busted.
Something has busted inside on that XLR connection. Yeah, it is tough to know exactly what that is. There shouldn't be any like physical moving parts.
Right.
But yeah,
just wires.
Some part of the wire has, I don't know, become disconnected, or could there be some component, a capacitor or anything that would be in line? And that seems a little unlikely.
Seems unlikely, but
perhaps a resistor could be in line. That's not out of the question. So that component might be gone. But yeah, he was like, yeah, there is a local repair shop that was willing to take a look at it, but of course they're going to charge a price just to take a look with no guarantee that they can fix it. And he's like, I've got other pre-pros. So yep, that's where you've landed, Gary.
Back at CES in January, Panasonic officially announced their new flagship Z95B series of OLED TVs, but they didn't announce prices or release dates. TCL is already selling the new QM6K series models that they announced at CES, but reviewers have remarked how unusual that is, with the TVs actually being available to purchase so soon after the announcement. TCL explicitly said that they were officially announcing only the QM6K series at CES so that they can make several official TV series announcements throughout the year instead of dropping info on all of their series all at once. Sony, for their part, didn't show any new TV models at CES, just like last year, and now that Gary has asked around a bit, the expectation seems to be that LG and Samsung will release their new TVs across March, April, and May, just as they always have for many years now, pretty much all of which were announced at CES. All of which, okay, whatever. While Sony and Panasonic will wait until the second half of the year to bring out their newest models. So which approach do we like best? I mean, the amount of brain power I've put towards reading this is more brain power than I put towards caring about it, but whatever. Panasonic, so is it Panasonic announced early, release late? Sony announced late, release late. LG and Samsung announced early release in Q2. New TCL approach announced one at a time throughout the year with releases coming soon after, but all spread out. And for buyers who wait for professional reviews before deciding to pull the trigger, there's often a glut of reviews in the middle of the year, and you might have to wait a month or two for reviews of the specific TV models you were interested in. So which approach would be most helpful in those cases?
I mean, so on that last part, I'm pretty sure that's why TCL has adopted this new approach. They're like, we're going to announce like one series at a time, and then 2 weeks...
Send out our reviews.
Yeah, 2 weeks after the announcement, we've already set out review samples. They're available in stores to buy like 2 weeks after the announcement. We're going to do it one at a time. Now, I guess, they're great for their PR department. That's more work throughout the year rather than having it all bunch up at one time type of thing. And then for the reviewers, I think that is a bit easier, right? It helps spread it out for them. They're not behind in 7 series all came out at once, but we can't review them all simultaneously, and we have to spread that out a bit. I think this, it helps spread it out for them. They're getting the review samples, a week or two before they're available in the store. It's really quite convenient for TCL to do things that way. So I have to think, we don't know for sure because this is kind of the first time that a major TV brand has done things that way, but I think there's quite a good logical reason behind doing it like that. I think it's a little bit tough for Panasonic doing what they did, announcing their full lineup of TVs at CES, and then they're not going to be out until just before Christmas. Like, that's a long wait. People have forgotten about them. People have bought all the other TVs that came out throughout the rest of the year. Coming in late like that, I'm like, I don't know if that's really the best approach. Sony waiting until the end of the year to announce and then releasing it not that long after, like, that kind of makes sense. But again, they're in the position of, it's almost like they're early for next year as opposed to being late for this year type of thing. It's maybe there's a bit of that approach. So all in all, I think, especially for the people who are waiting for reviews, I think spreading it out makes more sense. You sort of get to have that news cycle for yourself. It does make it easier on the reviewers. I think they're more likely to post a timely review, and then it's available to purchase either right away or shortly thereafter. I think the less you have people waiting between an announcement and when they can actually buy it, it is probably a good move. So yeah, that's where I land. I think TCL is onto a good idea here.
It looks like the IMAX that's nearest to me is a single projector limit. What's COLA? What's COLA? Single projector limited to, what's COLA? What does that mean?
I don't know.
I don't know what that means.
I don't know what COLA means when it comes to a projector.
It says, so IMAX laser locations use one of 4 types of 4K projector, a GT laser, a COLA, which is a single projector limited to 4K, XT, which is the same thing, and a dome laser, which is a single projector used in dome theaters. Very helpful. GT laser, dual projector system capable of up to 1.43 to 1. I don't know what this COLA means. What does COLA mean?
I'm not sure, man.
What does it mean? Rob? It doesn't make any sense. Stupid thing. Anyways, that's the one that's in Tampa. The one in St. Pete, I guess, is not listed at all as a laser, so it's not a laser, it's something else. All right, I don't care how they release their stupid TVs, so let's go on. Gary recently watched U571 on Blu-ray, and he decided to check out the special features on the disc. There was a picture-in-picture option called U-Control, and that rang a bell in Gary's memory. It's been ages since he's seen any release with U-Control. Do you remember it? Does it still exist? Well, it's one of those technologies where they, like, Blu-ray is going to be able to allow you to change the camera that you're watching or something. I don't remember how, or, this or that. And you could do all these amazing things, and it's all available. It's sort of like HDMI saying, oh, we have all these technologies available on our in our HDMI thing. If only somebody would implement them, and then nobody does, and it dies. So it's the same thing.
Yeah, U-Control was actually a branded specifically to Universal Pictures releases. That it was a branded trademark name for that ability to have your special feature play in a picture-in-picture window as the feature was playing at the same time. Because, of course, on DVDs, we had special features, but you would have to choose, okay, I can watch the whole movie, or I can choose a different soundtrack, for the director's commentary, but you had to manually choose a completely different soundtrack to have that play. Or you could watch a special feature, but that would take up the whole screen. It was its own video that would play on DVD. On Blu-ray, they were like, okay, with Java for the menus and with these, dual stream capabilities that were built into the format, you could have the original movie playing as it was, but then you could, on the fly, choose to switch to the director's commentary instead of the original soundtrack, or you could have a special feature playing in a picture-in-picture window instead of having to have, only one or the other. So that wasn't specifically called U-Control by, like, Blu-ray disc. That was Universal's branded name for picture-in-picture special features. So, I mean, it still exists in the sense that the Blu-ray format hasn't changed to, like, make it not possible to show picture-in-picture special features. If a studio wanted to do it, they still could. It's still part of the format. But yeah, none of the studios are putting that kind of money or time or effort into special features on disc releases anymore. So in that sense, it's dead. And U-Control specifically would only be Universal Pictures ever anyway.
COLA stands for commercial laser. I just looked
Gotcha. I'm glad you found that out.
I'm very excited about this whole
It has
experience.
Completed your life now.
Yeah, I am full of cola. I wish I had a cola. I'm thirsty. Tony, continuing his journey to acoustically treat his 10 by 12 by 8 foot room. Last week he said it would be fine to basically cover his whole back wall with bats of rock wall safe and sound insulation, just cover them with a curtain. He was originally thinking to have 2 more bass traps in the front in the front 2 corners, and then buy some professionally made panels to go on the side walls, with the side wall panels being the only ones that would actually be visible, so we'd save money on all the base trapping and only pay for nicer looking side wall panels. But he's come across some pieces of advice that also seem to fall in line with the things that we've said about acoustic treatments. It's a good idea to treat your front wall and have absorption behind your front speakers, and number 2, somehow this is also number 2. It's good to make your absorption panels as thick as you can. To those end, he found some Owens Corning R38 fiberglass insulation that comes in 2x4 foot bats that are 12.5 inches thick.
That's pretty thick.
He was able to confirm that they are rigid enough for him to make freestanding stacks of them that would be 6 feet tall and basically the entire 10-foot width of his room. My God. There's why do something a little when you can do it all?
Oh yes. Well, if one thing is good, then more must be better. But well, in this case, that's not out of line. It is.
So
it is
a mega bass strap covering almost his entire front wall with a light curtain over it is entirely possible. And then one more thing, he's got a closet space with the door removed on the back wall of his room. That's where his equipment rack is going to go. But above the equipment rack, inside the closet space, he was going to put another bass trap covering the whole 2.5 by 4.5 foot ceiling area, and that could be about 15 inches thick. So if he's got that bass trap in the closet and then 12.5 inches of absorption covering almost his entire front wall, is that a good idea? Is that enough treatment right there, and should he stop? Could that actually be too much bass trapping, or would he still want to cover the back wall with the rock wool? Would it maybe be better to put thinner rock wool bats on the front wall and super thick Owens Corning bats on the back wall? And what about the side walls now? Do they need any treatments at all anymore? So
interesting. This is interesting.
My man is pushing this 1/3 rule that we kind of talk about quite often here, which is sorry for those of you that watch the YouTube video there. I had an itch. Now people are going to be running to see what I scratched.
Sure. So, got to get those YouTube views somehow.
Yeah, really. So we, and not just us, but the general consensus is about 1/3 of your wall should be absorption. That's kind of, and most of the time we say,
I mean, that's probably a little on the high side, but yeah.
Yeah, 30%, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's on the high. Yeah, you probably wouldn't want to do much more than 30%. So 15 to 30%, it tends to be really, really good. Total surface area, right? Floor, ceiling, 4 walls. You take that total surface area, 15 to 30% covered in nice thick absorption, 4 inches or thicker. That's kind of what we're aiming for. You do that, you're going to have a really good, even across all frequencies, RT60 decay times.
Right. So does the 12.5 inches make sense? Does, if he treats, which wall should get the most treatment, which wall should get the least treatment? And if he just treats one, a couple of walls, does he need to ignore all the rest of the walls? Is kind of the question here. Yeah. So there's a couple of things I would be concerned about. The first thing that I would immediately be concerned about is this idea of putting a bunch of insulation in the closet with your equipment rack. Okay. And while I have necessarily no issues with that, the concern I have is about heat. Insulation is, it's not just for sound absorption. It does keep heat in or cold out or cold in and heat out depending on how things are going. So if you have a closet, even though it's open, and you put 15 inches of insulation above your equipment rack, that heat has to go someplace. Let's give it someplace to go.
Hopefully it is coming out the door. I mean, you could quite easily get a little bit of air circulation going in there by just having some of those like AC Infinity fans. Yes. Just have one at the top that has the air exhaust out the front, because you said the closet door is removed, so just make sure that the hot air is actually kind of actively being pushed out that closet door and not trying to get into the cavity above, because it's just going to go up there into that big insulation above everything and just kind of keep the heat there.
I like the idea of having insulation in that.
I do too, because you are going to get resonance inside of that that the cavity that is the closet space. So if you have no insulation in there, that's gonna be like bass gets in there and kind of resonates around in there. I do want to have insulation in there for sure.
But just be aware of the amount of heat that you're going to... I mean, and not... I mean, the room's small. You're not going to be giving off a ton of heat when it comes to like your amplifier power, unless you're like running Class A's or whatever, but or tubes. But because you're just not going to be pushing that much power. But a lot of times the heat doesn't come from the amplifiers anyways. It's going to come from video processing and other things. And while you might not think you're doing a whole lot of video processing, it doesn't mean that the circuits within the AV receivers aren't in some way active and putting off heat. So there are places that heat can be generated, and you want to make sure it's got some place to go. Now, as far as over treating one wall, and then so therefore you don't want to treat the other walls quite as much, sort of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like different tasks are going on here. Because like on a purely technical level, let's say all you did was put 5 full range speakers, a no bass management, into a 10-foot by 12-foot room. If you have that kind of scenario, then technically you could never have too much bass trapping. Technically speaking, you could fill up the entire 10-foot by 12-foot by 8-foot room with insulation, somehow fit your 5 full range speakers in there, and on a bass frequency response level, you have never made the bass worse by completely filling the room with insulation. There is no such thing in a small acoustic space like that as too much bass trapping, purely from a performance point of view. But we have to be realistic here. I'm already a little bit concerned with 12 and a half inches of floor space being taken up in a 10-foot by 12-foot room. Like, do you actually have enough space for the screen and seating distance that you wanted if you do that? Are you now pushing your seats pretty darn close to that back wall? Because that's worse. I don't want my seats close to the back wall, even if I have nice big bass traps on my back wall. I don't want to push my seats way back like that. So I'm a little bit concerned there. So if you are doing at least 2 subwoofers in this room, and you can position them across the room from each other, and now you're achieving quite nice linear uniform bass across what I'm assuming is probably like a 3-seater couch in a 10-foot by 12-foot room, and not too many more seats than that. If you can achieve that, upwards of 80 to 100 hertz with those 2 subwoofers, well, now, like, just by the numbers, there isn't a ton of reason to go thicker than 8 inches total. 8 inches, which is still a big, thick bass trap, but 8 inches total. Now that could very, very much be 6 inches of insulation and 2 inches of air gap, which is going to perform virtually identically to 8 inches of insulation all the way through. So 8 inches total, a quarter of that being air gap. I'm just talking about, purchase price is a consideration to him. So why purchase way more and take up more space than you actually need to get optimal results? So like optimal results are going to be achieved in here with more than one subwoofer, with at least 2 of them that are placed across the room from each other. Those 2 subwoofers playing up to 80 to 100 hertz. That's where the crossover is going to be, somewhere in that region. And then 8 inches thick total, so 6 inches insulation, 2 inches air gap is kind of ideal from a cost perspective. If that's what you have, that's kind of where I might stop. I think that's the optimization, and you're not taking up more floor space than you actually need to. Because the 12 and a half inches of insulation, it's not too much bass trapping, but if you have more than one subwoofer, there's kind of not a tremendous need for it. You've addressed the below 100 hertz stuff by having more than one subwoofer across the room from each other in here. So having both the front wall and the back wall treated, that's not too much. Having both the front wall and the back wall treated, that is not too much. I do want to have some insulation inside of that closet. The side wall treatment is now much less about bass trapping. If you have both the front wall and the rear wall treated with 6 to 8 inches of insulation on either of them, that's enough bass trapping. Like I say, you can't really do too much, but you can start making the treble sound too dead in this room. That can actually absolutely start happening. To the point that you might even put scatter plates on the back wall or something like that. That wouldn't be completely out of the question here, where it is still reducing the high frequencies, but not quite as much as just pure insulation would. The side walls, though, really are about those first reflections. It's about a specific reflection. that's happening. It's less about overall room decay times. You have addressed your overall room decay times if the front wall and the back wall are both treated. We're done there. The side walls are specifically about first reflections, about mid-range and higher frequencies. So if you had 3.5-inch panels on the sidewalls just at the first reflection points, I still say there's some benefit to there. It's not about overall decay times, it's about specific reflections there, and I think you're done.
Yeah, so you're going to read stuff that say that you shouldn't treat, and we've talked about it here before, you shouldn't treat first reflections, and sometimes, blah, blah, blah. I will always treat first reflections. I just don't see that there's enough of an argument to be made, and especially a room this small.
Well, it's are you listening to studio recorded music where the notion is I want the illusion that I have brought live instruments and live singers into my room? If that's the illusion you want to create, then keeping your first reflections untreated tends to be the advice. But if this is more a movie theater type of setting where the idea is I want the illusion that my room doesn't actually exist, that I, the viewer, have been sort of magically transported to whatever I'm seeing on screen, and all the audio cues about where am I, what is the environment that I'm in, those audio cues are included in the recording, and we're doing this via surround sound where we actually have sounds being generated from locations around us, well then you kind of want to get rid of the first reflections, those specific reflections on your side walls, because they will produce audio cues for your brain saying, hey, I've got walls here, whereas you reduce those, and now you get more of an illusion of I don't really know what acoustic space I'm actually in, but I'm brought into the illusion that I'm whatever I'm seeing on screen. Those audio cues are in the recording. So we tend to prefer, since we're mostly home theater based around here, treating those first reflections and creating that type of illusion.
So I would think you could get away with just like 2 panels, one next to each of your front speakers, and for that catch that first reflection. And I mean, in this case, you would save a bunch of money on quote unquote expensive panels. Yeah,
because you could do 2 of them. Just do 2 of them.
And you could pretty much be okay.
Yeah.
And like Rob said, I mean, if you over-treat it, you might find that you need to put some scatter plates someplace or, maybe get rid of a little bit of the insulation in the back or the front of the room just to have something to bounce off of. You could, but I would imagine that's not going to be the case. You'll see. Kevin, we talked about frame rate matching last week, as well as which streaming boxes we think are best. He is currently using his NVIDIA Shield Pro with his JVC NX5 projector. He only uses the Shield for streaming, not for any gaming or Plex, and he doesn't think he's ever messed around with his frame rate output settings. But he's also never noticed any objectionable issues when it comes to frame rates. He's had curiosity about maybe getting an Apple TV 4K, but this is a case of it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, things look a lot better with an Apple TV 4K, and what we say is it's better automatic frame rate matching versus his Shield Pro. Or if he's content with his Shield right now, should he just leave well enough alone? All right, so, okay. There's 2 ways that I address a question like this or an idea like this, because this happens a lot in many aspects of our lives. Sure. Like if you don't know what you're missing, should you pursue it? And will it be worth it? And the answer is we don't really know what your situation is, so we don't really know.
Although I got a pretty good idea because he did mention that he's using a JVC NX5. So I've got a pretty strong feeling based on that is the display you're using.
Right. So in general, though, should you never or should you always? So those are the should you always pursue excellence or the best, or should you just go like, well, I'm not unhappy, so therefore I'm going to stick with what I've got and I'm never going to upgrade. And if I sound like I'm talking about a specific person who sometimes is on this podcast who refuses to upgrade his subwoofers because he doesn't think he needs them, I am.
I mean, it's happened. You got to let that part of it go.
So, just because you're in a bad relationship and you don't realize how bad it is does not mean that you shouldn't go looking for a better relationship.
Okay.
But if you are in a good relationship and you know you're in a good relationship, do you need to start searching for something better?
I mean, there are cases where leave well enough alone is the right advice.
And we say that all the time, especially when it comes to upgrading subwoofers to get more headroom. We say that constantly around here. So, if, like, hey, the picture looks fine to me, and, I walk into your house, I'm like, they're pink.
Sure.
Why are people on your screen pink? Oh, that's just the way TV is. No, it's not. No, it isn't.
Everybody is stretched. That's just what HD TV looks like.
Yeah, it's just HD. Everybody's all extra wide.
That's right.
Or extra short, tall or something, depending on which aspect ratio has been changed. So yeah, you do need to get some outside help in some of these things. Yeah. So, it may be very well worth it to you to, like, if Rob wasn't able to answer the question based on the fact that he knows what your equipment is and has experience with both of it, then we may say, or I may say, you should play around with some of the frame rate stuff on Shield Pro just to see whether or not you can now recognize, oh, wait a second, I do now see that this thing that I thought always just looked this way because that's the way I thought it looked. Actually could look better, and I just never experienced it, therefore I never knew that it could look better.
Yeah.
And then you would decide whether or not, hey, I don't like how much trouble it is with the Shield Pro, or how it stutters, or how it has a black screen, or whatever it is that it does. And then you would get the Apple TV 4K, or you'd say, you know what, I don't really mind. You kind of have to know what you're missing.
Yeah.
So, Rob, what's he missing?
Yeah, so my general advice for the majority of NVIDIA Shield owners has been, yes, even though they've now done this new update that tries to make the automatic frame rate matching a little bit better, it's still a manual process on the NVIDIA Shield. You have to, every single time you play a new video, actually press a button to get it to try and detect what the frame rate is now and then match itself to it. So it's not truly automatic. It's still a manual button press. But my general advice for NVIDIA Shield has been set it to 4K 60 frames per second and just let it output 60 frames per second all the time, as long as the display that you have connected it to has good detection of when it was something that was originally shot in 24 frames per second, but now it's coming out of the NVIDIA Shield at 60 frames per second. Many displays can detect that. They'll detect that it was originally 24 frames because they'll see the repeated frames in the signal. Right. And they can do what is either inverse telecine if it was like originally interlaced, or reverse 3-2 pull down to get that cadence back and show it in a non-juddery, non-jerky motion looking thing, even though it was originally shot at 24. It was converted to 60 frames per second and coming out of the Shield at 60 frames. Many displays can detect that and show it to you judder-free. So the NX5 can do that. That's probably why you've never noticed that it's really a problem, because by default, if you've never messed around manually with the frame rate output options, the Shield naturally sets itself to output 4K 60 when it's connected to a display like the NX5. And if you've never touched that and you're like, it looks okay to me, I'm not seeing jerky, weird motion when there's a pan in a movie that goes across, it doesn't look all juddery to me. That's because the NX5 does have that kind of processing. It can detect, yeah, it was 24 originally, I'm getting a 60 frames per second signal, but I'll put it back to being judder free. The argument actually against, in this instance, switching to an Apple TV 4K and turning on the automatic frame rate matching in the Apple TV 4K is that the NX5 takes a while to reestablish its HDMI handshake. There's a pretty noticeable delay where every time the frame rate actually changes, there's a pretty lengthy black screen. You might hear the audio playing, but not see anything while the NX5 reestablishes its HDMI handshake with the new frame rate that just got changed. And that, to me, is more annoying than just letting it be 60 hertz all the time coming out of your source and relying on the NX5 doing a good job of detecting when the original signal was 24 frames per second inside of that 60 hertz container. So this is a specific case of, I think you should leave well enough alone. I think you should go ahead and stick with your NVIDIA Shield. Don't change it from 60 hertz output, which is almost certainly what you're using right now, because the alternative is, yes, technically, the output from the source device will match the original frame rate of the signal if you go to an Apple TV 4K and use its automatic frame rate switching, but now you're going to have to put up with black screens while your NX5 does a new HDMI handshake every time the frame rate changes, and I think that's a worse experience. So for you, I say leave it well enough alone.
There you go. Jason decided to clean out and redo his equipment closet. He had an old HTPC and a bunch of hard drives in there that he's no longer using. And after buying a new SanDisk equipment rack to hold everything he's going to keep, he spent several weekends carefully reinstalling and organizing everything with wire management to satisfy his OCD. But before he finalized everything, he decided to test all of it.
That's a good idea.
Uh-oh. Maybe you should have tested it before this, but whatever. So he's still using a Harmony Ultimate remote with a Harmony hub, and his lights are all controlled with a Lutron system, including a Lutron bridge. That all used to work perfectly fine together, but now his Harmony doesn't seem to be able to control his lights. He wound up doing a full factory reset on the Harmony remote and hub. Then he pulled up the Harmony app on a Samsung S20 phone to reprogram his devices and activities. The Harmony app seemed to find his Lutron bridge on his network just fine, so he added it as a device. And the Harmony app prompted him to access his Lutron account and authorize the connection between Harmony hub and his Lutron bridge. The button to authorize was right there on his Lutron account, so he clicked it. And the Harmony app indicated that the link was successful. But then when he goes to actually control his Lutron lights with either the Harmony app or the Harmony Ultimate remote, there's an error message saying it's not able to communicate with his Lutron bridge. His Lutron lights are working just fine when he uses the Lutron app, and it used to all work perfectly with his Harmony setup, but now he's stumped. Do we have any ideas how to resolve this issue? This is how Lutron, this is how Harmony slowly dies, is by things supposedly working and then it used to work and now it doesn't work and no one knows why and there's nobody to call. I thought that we had to access Harmony on our computers. I thought that the phone app wasn't.
Well, it was really bad because,
well.
Once we got to the hub-based systems, there were settings you could change on the remote itself. There were settings you could change in the smartphone app, and then there were settings you could change in the desktop software, and it wasn't identical across all three, and it was very annoying in the last days of Harmony that occasionally you had to go to one or the other. But in this case, Jason, you are not alone. There are other people reporting who are still using Harmony hub-based systems that used to have it working perfectly fine with their Lutron-based lighting. That something broke. And now Harmony, for their part, has said, we haven't done any updates for years at this point. And I believe them because they discontinued their remotes and they shut down the Harmony division for the most part. And they're like, we have not changed anything on our end in years. And I believe that they are telling the truth when they say that. Lutron has posted some responses. They didn't explicitly say, yes, we pushed an update, but they do push updates from time to time. And they said, we are now aware that there is this issue, that they are attempting to work with Logitech to find a resolution, but there's not a lot of promise because Logitech is not updating the Harmony software at this point. They are done with it. It is essentially what it is, and that's it. And if some other system pushes an update that breaks those two things working together, either, Lutron has to fix it or put it back or do something like that, or else there just isn't really anything you can expect Logitech is going to do about it at this point. They're not updating to match newer updates from other companies. So you're not alone, Jason. It doesn't sound super promising. Lutron is aware of it, so that's better than nothing. It's not utterly impossible that Lutron will do something and push another update at some point that gets it working again, but I can't imagine it's a super high priority for them given that Harmony is a completely discontinued system at this point. So it doesn't sound super promising. But it's not your fault. It's not like he just could have changed the setting and it all magically worked. Right. It's like he's not alone. Lutron pushed an update and it broke things.
All right, so his Harmony is controlling his Denon X4500H receiver, Sony X800M2 Ultra HD Blu-ray player, and his Bell satellite TV box just perfectly fine, but he hasn't been able to get it to Bluetooth pair with his NVIDIA Shield again after his full factory reset. He has been hitting the Bluetooth pair button on the Harmony Hub and then going into the Shield's Bluetooth setup menu to search for Bluetooth devices, but the Shield just searches and searches with the Harmony Hub and with the Harmony Hub never showing up. And eventually the hub's flashing light to indicate pairing mode goes back to solid green and nothing has happened. Any ideas?
So
I thought, isn't that the reverse direction it should be pairing?
Yeah. The pairing process to the NVIDIA Shield from the Harmony Hub is a little bit more involved, and there is a caveat to it, a pretty big caveat to it, which is you can first go into the Harmony software, and the app works perfectly fine for this. You add the NVIDIA Shield as a device to your Harmony software, and you're doing this first. But then you actually have to set up an activity that involves the NVIDIA Shield. And as part of that activity setup, it will prompt you to say, now go search in the keyboards and devices section of the NVIDIA Shield's menu for the pairing signal from the Harmony Hub at that point. And it prompts you to do that. Now, the thing is, NVIDIA Shield just had an update recently too. And I don't know for sure whether that original pairing process really is successful and still works. It's not impossible that with the latest NVIDIA Shield firmware update that just came out a couple of weeks ago, that something might have broken with Harmony pairing there too. But the pairing process is definitely different than what you described. And there is the caveat that the only time the pairing works is when you're setting up an activity that involves the NVIDIA Shield. Just the device pairing by itself doesn't work. It has to be part of the activity setup.
That's weird.
It is weird. It was always a weird caveat. But yeah, that one is worth a try because they actually have the instructions printed out for specifically how to pair with the NVIDIA Shield.
Lastly, he says, is it maybe time to just say goodbye to his Harmony and Hub entirely? If so, what universal remote options does he have that could control all of his home theater devices and his Lutron lights? Well, the Lutron lights almost certainly are going to be the issue here.
It is right
this
this
Sofa Baton
moment.
will do everything else.
But not the Lutron lights
Not the
directly.
lights.
Yeah. Now, I would say to wait instead of buying one of the available Sofa Baton models right this second, because the X2 is coming. And I am very much looking forward to the Sofa Baton X2 because there are just usability things I don't love about the X1 and the X1S. I would prefer that the buttons I see on the little OLED screen at the top of the Sofa Baton were just buttons I could push like I can on the Harmony Ultimate, right? That's a touch screen. The buttons show up on the screen. They change dynamically based on what activity or device I'm using, and I can push my finger right on the button that I see on the screen rather than using a thumb scroll wheel and a click in, and the back button for the screen is awkwardly up at the top right corner of the Sofa Baton. And it's not that it doesn't work, and it's not that you can't get used to it, but usability wise, I much prefer the way the X2 is going to work. And it's supposedly coming out in May, so it's not ages and ages away. And you know, when we say that, it's like Sofa Baton has been pretty good about hitting their release targets. They're pretty well established at getting hardware out the door when they say they're going to. So it might be delayed. That always could happen, but I'm very confident it's going to be this year that the X2 comes out. Now, the other side of it is the X1 and the X1S. As far as a home automated lighting that they can control, it's only Philips Hue that they're fully compatible with right now. Now, there is a way, using IFTTT and a little bit of your own programming, to make a Hue bridge control Lutron lights. It's not going to do that by default, but if you're willing to venture into IFTTT, there are ways to make that Hue bridge that the Sofa Baton X1S can connect to readily, control Lutron-based lights. But that means you're changing significantly what's going on in your house. You're going away from the Lutron bridge and the Lutron app to the Philips Hue bridge and the Philips Hue app, but then using IFTTT on your own to get that Philips Hue bridge to control Lutron lights. So yeah, it's quite the workaround. The Sofa Baton X2 is supposed to be fully part of the Matter smart home interoperability system. The X1S is not. It's not part of Matter, but the X2 is supposed to be part of Matter. Now, whether that's going to be great at controlling your Lutron lights, that's still up in the air, but there's much more chance of the X2 controlling your Lutron bridge directly. The X1S is just not going to do it. So it's going to be Sofa Baton, but I'm saying wait for that X2 to come out.
All right. We are at 2 hours, so let's
fine.
go ahead. I know we have a couple of questions left, but we're going to have to wait for them to next week.
Yeah, this is a little bit of an
left?
unusual one here. So Bob in the Philippines, which was actually the last one that I wrote out for this week. So apologies, Bob, but you will be first up next week. And then Saucy did send in another question on Monday, so that'll be on the list too.
All right. We want to thank our listeners in the week. We want to thank our 133 patrons over at patreon.com/AVRant podcast.
We sure do. That is patreon.com/AVRant podcast. If you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So a big thanks to our 133 patrons over there.
We also got notes of gratitude from Mark, Dave, Tony, Kevin, and Jason. Thank you for thanking us.
We did indeed, and I'll say the names one more time. Mark, Dave, Tony, Kevin, and Jason, thank you very much for the notes of gratitude and encouragement. We very much appreciate them. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
If you want your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Antry.
And I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.